Welcome to Great Practice, Great Life by Atticus Incorporated.
Hey, it's Steve Riley. Welcome to this episode of Great Practice, Great Life. And we have a great one for you today. Today, we're going to talk about how one lawyer courageously rebuilt his law firm after having the entire thing wiped out by a hurricane. But not only has he rebuilt it, but he's really gotten to a position where he's got a unique niche, a unique model, and has grown his firm very, very well and very aggressively. So with that, I'd like to welcome Gerard Virga from the Virga Law Firm. Gerard, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on, Steve.
It's great to have you on, and you have a lot to share. You and I were talking about everything from AI to growth. We're having all kinds of good conversations. Unfortunately, I forgot to record them. So we're going to have to start from ground zero on a couple of these things. So before we talk about how you rebuilt your law firm, could you tell everybody a little bit about your practice, where you're at, what you do, so they can have an appreciation of where you're at today, who you represent, all those kind of good things?
Okay, well, back in 2015, I had just got done going through a divorce myself, and I was married to a lawyer, and unfortunately that didn't work out. We do have two beautiful kids together, and I had to start over. And so I started over, and I decided I wanted to just solely focus on family law. And so I opened up an office first in Panama City, and then within about a year's time, we had expanded over to Fort Walton, and then over to Pensacola. And we have a satellite office in Orlando now with some remote attorneys in Indian River, Orlando area, West Palm. And so we're now doing cases pretty much throughout the state of Florida using a mix of brick and mortar and remote hybrid type work.
So I have a question, Gerard. Why family law?
You know, that's the first question I ask people when they interview, what's your why? Because if you can't come up with a why, like in the first 30 seconds or so, that intrigues me, then you probably don't have what it takes to do family law, because it's so emotionally, draining in a lot of ways, and just an emotional type of litigation. And, not to sound cheesy, Steve, but the best thing I can tell you is one time I was out eating with my wife, and this young lady came up and hugged me. As you can imagine, my wife wanted to know who the heck that was. And, before I could figure out who it was, she said, "Sir, thank you. You don't remember me. I was 8 years old, and I was in a home where my mother was being abused, and, my father was fighting for custody of me. And, you can put a lot of zeros at the end of a check, but, no amount of zeros will make that up. That's when you go to bed at night, knowing that you help people through that, whether it be, children who are in a bad place or people who are really struggling emotionally going through the process, to be there for them when they're not in the position maybe to be there for themselves and to be their voice. That's why I choose to do it.
That's amazing. That's a great story. Could you share everybody with your tagline? You have a great tagline on your firm.
Our overall goal is that we're going to help you rebuild. And we've had to, through, you mentioned the hurricane, I'm sure we're going to go into that, but we're always rebuilding, and, life is always forcing you to have to rebuild. And, and that's what we want to be there, is we want to be the people who help you rebuild that tomorrow. In fact, one of my favorite lines, if you enter in there with me during a consultation or, giving clients some advice, is you cannot live life looking in the rearview mirror. It's guaranteed way you're going to slam into something. And let's not looking in the past, and let's look to tomorrow and what we can build for tomorrow and get you to that tomorrow that you want. And that's what we remind our clients of. And when we have our team huddles, that's we're building a firm for tomorrow. What worked yesterday won't work for tomorrow, and it's always changing and evolving, and you're always rebuilding. And we're here to help people rebuild their lives from probably one of the most devastating things you can experience.
It's a very powerful reframing story. I like the way you do that. It cuts off the past. It refocuses, has a conversation around rebuilding, and moves them to a future state, a future possibility. It's a very powerful story. Is it something that occurred? Is it just a story you told about with the young lady, or was it your experience going through it yourself? Was that another kind of brick to the why, another
Yeah.
support to the why?
I think going through a family law case, if you've never gone through one, it really is eye opening because you can take a very sane person who's a professional in the community, and it's enough to make anybody crack emotionally. I've seen guys who come in and they're, kind of a little heavy set. They're 6 foot something, kind of burly guys, and by the end of the divorce, they they've lost all this weight. And I joke around, tell them they're on the divorce diet, and then trying to get them to open up and talk to me about what they're going through, what they're emotionally feeling. I'm not a counselor in the scientific word, but get them to open up. But yeah, my own personal experiences, I tell clients all the time that you can go to law school and a parenting plan or a time sharing schedule with your kids looks great, legally sufficient, all the boxes are checked. But you know what? The best one still sucks. There's no good way to do this in a lot of these circumstances. And the best thing I can do is get you to cooperate. If I can get you to cooperate and get the other side to cooperate, start getting us to some yeses, maybe taking the temperature down. Um, you know, I, I love trial. Trial's a passion, and it's something I'm good at and enjoy doing. But when I get to the trial, it's usually because the process is broke down, and I take it as I felt somewhere along the way. If I can't get it, unless it's a very extreme situation where we left with no options, try to resolve it in the most amicable way. Because I tell clients all the time that if you have kids, especially, you're not getting divorced. You're getting legally separated, but you're still connected, and you're going to be connected. And they're, I love it when clients say, well, my kid's only 2 years, they'll be 18. And I have to remind them that, don't you think that kid's going to graduate college? Don't you think they're probably going to get married? Think there's going to be a grandbaby? Who do you think is going to be in the waiting room at the hospital with you? So I can do my job and litigate, for you. And I'll do it. I'll do it all day. And it's not anything that I'm opposed to doing. But when I do that, I'm going to create extra scar tissue, which is going to take a lot more time to heal. But if we can get to yes, and we can get out of this mindset that it's a zero sum game, and we can get to a different view, then maybe we can get to something that will not only work for you, but it'll work for your kids, it'll work for your grandkids, because people don't realize it, but divorce has generational effects. And, trying to nip those in the bud is, and minimize and mitigate the damage is really, I think, the highest calling for a divorce family law attorney that there is.
It is attorney and counselor at law. So I think there's a lot of counseling involved. And what I hear from you is a lot of wisdom from your own battle scars and going to court. I mean, you just mentioned that you've done 5 trials at the beginning of this year already. So that's a lot. I mean, that's a lot of trial work.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are. That's a lot of trial work. That's a lot of preparation. That's a lot of, that's a lot of wear and tear. So let's, anything else you want to say about that before we talk about your rebuild, the physical rebuild?
I just think that, the biggest thing for whether you're an attorney listening or you're somebody going through a family law situation, just try to focus on what is positive in the future and, what you need to build that future and what your client really needs to build that future, as opposed to getting hung up on, like I said, the zero sum game or the tit for tat. And, that's where I try to strategically focus my mind, whether it's an emotional thing or it's, dealing with the children, or if it's a financial thing. What do we really need to build the future that you want to have? And how do I secure that future for you and give you a good foundation where you can go forward, and not have to dwell on the negativity of the past, and maybe hopefully those wounds will heal, if I can get you a good foundation for the future. I tell clients all the time, the best revenge in life is success. If you're happy going forward, that is the best revenge. It's better than any tit for tat, nasty text message. When you're happy and you're prospering, that's success. And, let the other side see that, and don't ever let them see you down or they got the better of you, and let's be positive and move forward.
Great advice. Everything you're doing is reframing it from a punitive experience where there has to be punishment involved to an experience of future state, a future action, a future dream, a future rebuild. I really like it. I love how you're framing it.
A lot of clients will, Florida's a no fault state. And so they want to come in here and prove that the other spouse was the bad guy. The other spouse did this, they did that. I have to stop and tell them that it's a no fault state. And honestly, the judge is not going to care. He's going to tell you to move on. He wants to know what the assets are that have to be split, where the kids have been living, who's been doing the handling the primary responsibilities associated with the children. And, with that, I don't mean to be smart like when I say it, but I've kind of developed another one I use a lot is, if you want justice, it's in the next world. It's not in this world. We're here to, to dissolve this marriage and for me to, to build a new ship, new life raft for you to move forward on. And for you to, get away from this problem you have and this heartache you're going through. And, we'll let justice get worked out some other place, because in a no fault system, we're not here to prove right and wrong. We're here to get you your fair share and get the other side their fair share and maintain your relationship with your children and do it in the most constructive way possible. And, sometimes people forget that if you harm your spouse and you try to get more than your fair share and you have kids, you inadvertently harm the kids, because they're half the time or some percentage of the time with the other parent, or they're seeing the other parent struggling. That's not a good look either, because kids do grow up and they will ask questions. And I've seen that I've been doing this so long. I've seen people come back and I run into them and the kids are now 19, 20 years old and they have a lot of questions. And now everything's on the internet, with the cases, and they can do their own reading. So, sometimes being gracious to a degree while being fair is actually what's best for those kids and their future, because they didn't ask for this. No kid asked for their parents to get divorced.
The fantastic reframing and a lot of wisdom there. So, you ready to pivot to the next conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nothing is going to impact your law practice like AI. The impact of AI on the legal industry will be transformative. The question is, are you prepared? Now, I've done a podcast on this previously, the 3 challenges of integrating AI into your law practice. One of the things I want to remind you is that we're teaching in 2025 a Grow Your Practice with AI course. Now, this will be taught 4 times live, but it includes 22 hours of previously recorded episodes in 2024. So episodes that we taught everything from how to use AI to look at deposition, go through complex documents, how to train your team using AI as a shortcut for team training. All those different courses are recorded and ready for your viewing. Now, if you're an Atticus member, it's already included in your membership. All you have to do is sign up for the class. We'll teach it 4 times live in 2025. Now, if you're new to Atticus and you're not an existing member, the investment is $1,500 for this program. $1,500 covers it all of 2025. Furthermore, if you are an audience member and you want to take advantage of a special code just for audience members, the code is AI Podcast 300. So when you register, it takes $300 off your investment. So the $1,500 drops to $1,200. So if you haven't taken advantage of this, it's a no-brainer deal. So if you're new to Atticus and you want to check us out, this is a great way of checking us out. It's a virtual program, so you don't have to travel anywhere. I promise you, you'll make 10 times that investment back. So with that, the information on how to register is in the link below. Look forward to seeing you there. So one of the fascinating things about you is that you had a very successful practice, and then you got presented with a challenge that you didn't ask for, which was Hurricane Michael. So what was going on with the practice before, and what was going on with the practice after?
Well, Panama City was, really thriving. It was doing well. Fort Walton was really took off very quickly, and we had just kind of opened up Pensacola, and we're getting it off the ground. And I'm out, getting ready for trial. I was getting ready for a family law trial, and started to hear this hurricane and taking a shift, toward our area. And our judges, we live in like Hurricane Alley, Pensacola, Fort Walton, Panama City. Every year somebody is getting hit with some sort of storm, but we weren't prepared for a hurricane category 5 like that. We didn't expect that. So our judges, delayed closing to the last minute until they're certain, because they're trying to maintain their dockets and order in the court system. So when they gave the order to close, that they were going to close, and it looked pretty imminent that we were going to get hit, we let everybody off, took the best precautionary measures that we could with the time we had to protect what we could. But nothing we did was gonna, I think the sustained winds were 155 miles per hour, and my wife and I kind of made, I guess, a bad choice. We live on the beach, Panama City Beach, and normally the beach is what gets hit, and town doesn't get hit. So we moved in town out of the flood zone, and we actually ended up in the eye of the hurricane. In fact, my car was destroyed on severeweather.com. There's footage of it getting walloped and destroyed. And when we got done with the hurricane passed, I remember waking up that morning and my wife was still sleeping. I got out on foot and I probably walked a good 2 or 3 miles up the road just to see if we get the car out. And we were able to find a path and get out. And I had found out that our entire office had been pretty much just demolished. The walls were not, some places, the exterior walls were not holding the ceiling up anymore. It had flooded, it was just soaking wet. And so the day after we got back, so it was about 2 days after the hurricane, I got in the car and, we were at my sister's house. My kids were safe, wife safe, everybody's safe and accounted for. And she's like, "Where are you going?" And I said, "We have to go get a new office space." And she's like, "What do you mean?" And she was very upset and kind of a little emotional. I said, "If we don't do this, we're out of business. And then the people who work for us need us now more than ever, because they're going to need their income. And our clients are definitely going to need our help, cleaning up after this mess, because I could only imagine what was coming." And so I drove over to Panama City Beach, which was a gamble because the courthouse is in town. And the prevailing logic at the time was no lawyer could survive out on the beach too far from the courthouse. And, but in town was pretty much demolished. And I pulled up and I saw an older gentleman dressed in a Hawaiian shirt, kind of looked like Jimmy Buffett. And I just rolled down the window and I said, "Sir, do you know who owns this building? And, if there's any openings in it?" And he just said, "Well, just so happens I'm the owner and the 5th floor is open." And so he gave me a pretty good price on renting out the 5th floor. And the business that was here prior had went out of business, which was kind of ominous. But they had left all their furniture, which I was in sore need of. So he gave me a good deal on the furniture. And the next day we started taking pickup trucks, trailers, whatever we could get our hands on, and trying to get what was still salvageable. And had a lot of paper files back then and had paper spread out everywhere with a box fan, trying to dry and salvage what we could of the client files, and started to rebuild. And that was October. And that you lose the whole office. You gotta get new furniture. Half the computers are shot. Nobody's paying you anything. You're not collecting anything at the moment. The bank account dwindled pretty quickly. It was looking pretty low. And, my wife said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "I think we will, so let's just have faith." And that November happened to be the busiest November we ever had, because of the number of people who were facing relocations and trying to move with their children, or parents who did not bring their children back because the house had been destroyed they were living in. And, you're so busy focused on you that you're not focusing on the outside world. And, I was kind of looking at the number of cases that were filed versus the number of cases that we had filed. And it's we were hitting almost every ball there that came across the plate. And I started to realize that the other attorneys didn't move, that they didn't go find a new location. And a lot of them were just very content with sitting and waiting for the electricity to be restored or the power to be restored. Internet, some of them were without internet for months. And it was that resilience, in my opinion, that saved us. And then it allowed us to help our clients, but then help a lot of other people out who were in a bad spot who needed somebody. And we did so well. I felt so blessed that we were able to be a lot more easier on payments with people if they needed flexibility. I remember one lady came and paid us, and I didn't know, and she had, I guess, mentioned to the receptionist that she was living in a enclosed trailer like you pull behind a car. And so I got the check and ran it back downstairs and was able to give it back to her and just tell her to keep it and that we'd keep working the case, and maybe we'd square up, maybe we wouldn't, but I said, what are we fighting for? If I get you custody, I can't get you custody and tell the judge that their kids are going to live in an enclosed car trailer. So I was like, you got to have a future. And, it's touching and still kind of, really gets me, when I think about it. And, we were so devastated, and it was so close to Christmas that my wife really wanted to give back, and we felt like we had been pretty blessed. And we came up that year with something called Operation Santa, and we did a huge, firm sponsored toy drive, and anybody else who would donate. And a lot of the places, the roads were still not really accessible. There was not a lot of light. A lot of areas didn't have lights. There was logs piled up to the side of the road, probably 6 foot high. And we had at that time we had a small little passenger bus we had access to. And so we loaded the bus with toys. We would route a route, and we had Santa Claus on the bus with us, and we would actually go deliver the gifts to the kids. And it was something that was probably the most fun and the most heartbreaking thing you experience at the same time.
What an amazing story. I mean, what inspired that? Was it your wife's idea? What's your wife's name?
My wife's name is Mary. Mary, she's got like the biggest heart, and she's very compassionate, caring person. She was going through it. I think we were all trying to find a way to make sense of what happened to us, and looking at, even though our office was destroyed, our home was spared. And, how do you make sense of who the winners are and who the losers are in those situations? And
Yeah, there's no way.
and you see, what was really heartbreaking is even when you would drop off the toys, Mary noticed this. You would drop off the latest Hot Wheels or whatever the kids wanted, and the thing that they were most excited about often were the food gift cards. That was more exciting. They were going to definitely have food, because you had people who were basically, they had tarps over their house or what was left of their house. They were basically living in a tent with the remnants of a house underneath the tent. And, we just all wanted to give back. And Mary was the one who really did all the legwork and organizing it. And, we had a guy at the time working for us named Justin. He was prior military, and he would kind of take the point, and kind of scout the road out, and the bus would follow, make sure that nobody got stuck or anything, or we weren't going into a bad situation, because it was, pitch black and you couldn't see what was going on. And, unfortunately, those circumstances sometimes bring out the worst in people as well as the best. And, it was, probably one of the greatest things we ever did. It was a good opportunity to get back, and it's something we still look back fondly on. And we've done a lot of toy drives throughout the years and things like that. But that one, I hope that we never have the opportunity to do that again, because it was such a bad experience with the hurricane. But it's something I'll never forget. It's probably the most rewarding thing I ever did as a lawyer.
Well, let's give everybody a framework, because you and I know what the timeline is, but tell everybody, because not everybody understands what Michael did to you. I mean, you're explaining it, but talk about the timeline. Like, how many years has it been?
It was 2018. So we're coming up on 7 years in October.
Very good. Thank you. And as you look back as a practitioner, as an owner of your law firm, because you basically had this really unfortunate situation where your law firm got erased, right? You got erased. You had some paper files left over, and you had to rebuild and restart. What do you think the three biggest changes were that you were able to do to make the law firm a more effective or efficient place to operate, practice in? So you look back saying, well, I had this great big eraser, whether I liked it or not. What did you change and why did you change it?
I think what we try to change the most was lawyers are taught from law school going forward. At least they were. I'm kind of getting up there now. Maybe the younger generation's not, but we're not supposed to be too touchy feely. We're not supposed to be too involved. Personal is different than professional, and don't blur the lines. And while some of that is still good advice, I think it forced us to realize that the clients were people. They were going through very unique challenges, not standard for family law. I learned more about insurance, hurricane insurance, and how that gets split in a divorce, and other things that never come up. But I think it culturally in the firm created a little more of a openness and willingness to look into the deeper problems that hey, this client's living in an enclosed trailer, or this is these special circumstances that normally we would look at. We would just be looking at the like a balance sheet of assets, but getting beyond that. I also think that it shook up the dynamic of the team as a whole, and it changed it. And while some of those people have moved on during that time, I felt like in any office, there's always some politics, there's certain cliques, there's different camps, different mindsets. But when you're faced with such a challenge like that, and everybody's in it to test their own survival and realizing what people are really up against that you're representing, I think that sense of war, you're waging war to survive, you're waging war for your client to help them survive after something so devastating. Nothing brings people together better than that. And I think that's something that, culturally at the law firm that we changed. And then I think the next big takeaway is not as grandiose, it's more practical, but we really leaned a lot more into our case management software. We leaned a lot more into cloud backups and cloud systems. We leaned into multi-point servers where I have a server in my living room now. That's a leftover or a benefit from the hurricane. Each office has one. I have one in my living room. And we have one paralegal who works for us who works a lot and works on Saturday and Sunday mornings and loves to catch up. She'll say, "I'm in here working." I was like, "I know." "Well, how do you know?" I said, "I heard the server start clicking at 8:30." I said, "You must have been busy," because it was writing, and you could hear it coming on and working and writing. But I think leaning into the technology was a big thing for us because, of course, right after we rebuilt from the hurricane, the good Lord threw us another curveball with the pandemic. And I remember I was at the grocery store and another lawyer called me and said, "I just saw the bottom footer on y'all's email that y'all were going virtual and closing, and that's not been mandated." And I said, I think it's coming. If it's, I saw it, coming about 2 days before it was a forced order. And we didn't really have to do a whole lot of anything to transition because we'd already made all the transitions to cloud, to Zoom, to, I think we bought 2 or 3 extra laptops for some staff members that didn't normally, have a need for a laptop. And we were able to pivot directly into that. And I think the hurricane taught us that. And between the pandemic and the hurricane, I don't know if you've ever heard it, but there's a Bruce Lee quote that, you must learn to move like water. I think that, the pandemic and the hurricane have left a mark on me and really made me understand what Bruce Lee was talking about, moving like water, be like fluid and take the form that, is presented to you and roll with it. And if you get too rigid with anything, life will find a way to shake that up for you. And better to be fluid and adaptable and fit into any crevice or whatever you need to do to survive and just rebuild time and time again and just keep being committed to rebuilding. We were talking about the AI. We're in the process of rebuilding the entire firm around the AI because if we don't, I think the majority of us who work here have realized we won't be here. We had one person who's very reluctant to change, and I could be kind of a joker. I started texting them pictures of dinosaurs and mammoths and other great animals that roam the earth that are not here anymore. I was like, those are the things that refuse to change. That's where they end up. And I'm not ready to go there yet. I got kids to feed and got a little bit left in me as far as my career goes. And so we're rebuilding again. And we've had lots of people who've worked here throughout the years. Some of them have stayed, some of them have left. Who kind of, you're always changing things. You're always, if you're not changing them and you're not, reflecting on them, and you're not willing to rebuild as part of the process and continue to rebuild, you might as well just go home, because it's not you're not going to be able to compete with the world. It just changes. It's now at a alarming rapid pace of change constantly, and if you're not willing to go toe to toe and run the race, then you need to probably find something else to do.
Where does this sense of resilience in moving like water come from? Where does this come from for you?
I think that, probably the best answer I can say is probably my wife and my kids. We have, Mary works at the firm, but we have a very kind of conventional marriage, and then I kind of the breadwinner. When you have other people who count on you, and, you really embrace that role as like the head of your household. And then here, I'm not running the law firm because I make more money running the law firm. I've had people offer me jobs that would probably pay me more than running the law firm, but I have a sense of responsibility to the people who work here, and I'm doing it for all of us. And, I'm doing it for them because I care about their families. And if you get rigid and you're not willing to change, or you're not willing to feel the pain of change, then, then you're doing a disservice to those that you're either responsible for, or those that are looking at you for leadership. You have to be willing to do that. And I think that, with that, how can you tell your clients as a family law attorney that we're changing things, that we're going to try to build you a better tomorrow, and I need you to be resilient, if you aren't willing to do it yourself? And, I used to do criminal law too in the beginning. And when I niched into family law, that was one of the things, I kind of try to have a lot of integrity and transparency as like a person. And, how can I be telling you how to make good choices or how to behave? And then you see me on the front page of the newspaper in a criminal case. And I started thinking, I was like, are you being hypocritical? Are you being, really transparent? Are you living up to the advice you're giving? Are you setting that standard for your clients? Because the older I get and the more I do this, you can get a lot of good lawyers. A lot of my clients probably could read the book themselves and figure out a lot of the material. And then, with AI, probably could do it too. But what's really paying me is, I think, for guidance and somebody you can trust, and then someone to teach you the ropes about this and to get you into the right mindset, as along with, teaching you about the process that's causing you so much anxiety. And, another thing that we're working on, rebuilding and revamping, and have some attorneys that love it who work here, and some attorneys that don't like change, that push back. But we're working now on a better methodology and technology that offers the client more of a window as to what status their case is, which phase. And then we have instructional videos for each phase. We're working on literature for each phase. And then I do my own podcast, the Florida Family Law Attorney. So if we have information that comes from that, offering links, that might be applicable to that phase, because a lot of the anxiety and the unpleasant parts of family law stem from their personal fears and anxiety, and you're going to pick the phone up and call you. And I think I realized that if I can teach them, I can show them, the clients that are more discerning, that helps them take some of that edge off. And it helps me maybe build that relationship with them a little better. I had a client the other day who asked her, "So you ready to prep for your deposition?" So, "What do you mean I've been prepping?" I'm like, "How did you prep? I wanted to hear this," and I've been listening to podcasts on depositions for the last 3 months.
Oh my gosh.
Since the first deposition when it got canceled, I went ahead and I started listening, and I went over it with her, doing my due diligence, and it was perfect. And when we went to the deposition, and she had some of the best answers and just would not guess, wouldn't speculate, wouldn't. I was like, I asked her, I was like, which podcast were you listening to? Because it doesn't have to be my idea. It could be if somebody else has a great podcast or great information, I can pass on to my clients and, hey, maybe you should start listening to this now, So, you know, I just think that we, as family law attorneys, if you're not resilient, you can't ask your client to do something you're not willing to do.
Makes perfect sense to me. Let's talk a little bit more about your lawyers. How many attorneys do you currently employ in the firm?
We have 6.
Okay, 6. And what challenges do you have managing 6 lawyers at different locations? Your virtual, some brick and mortar, different offices. What do you think your biggest challenge is with managing those attorneys?
I love all the attorneys. I don't mean any disrespect when I say this, but I've asked some of them, would you like to switch with me? And their answer is no, they would not. So I think they'll understand. I think that, with that, each attorney kind of has their own mentality of, I'm a lawyer. I went to 7 years of school. I passed the bar exam. This is how I want to do it. And I think it's hard to build a process around the lawyers because then they feel confined or they feel like you're micromanaging them. I think that can breed resentment. So I try to bring them into the fold. There, of course, has to be, some point where the buck stops here, but what can we all get on the same page on this? What can we all agree on? And then trying to get them to buy in. I think the buy-in at times is hard, especially like when you're looking at new technology, new communications. We have certain attorneys that want the file labeled a certain way, no matter what, they want it labeled that way. And when it, doesn't necessarily mesh with another system, they still can't do it if it's not labeled that way. And working with them, on that, trying to come up with compromises. I think that's always probably the challenge is to build a process around them. I heard John Morgan from Morgan and Morgan talking, and he was talking about removing attorneys from the process as much as possible was something that he learned. And it's something that we've been talking about doing a lot more of is what can we do with other staff members to get all the evidence gathered up? What can we do with staff members and AI to get things indexed or propose questions or to basically put it on the plate for the attorney? And then now, you do the attorney stuff with it, mark it up, go through it again, check it, get ready for trial, and maybe focus the attorney a little bit more on the interaction with the clients and the higher level thinking. That's something we've been working on, but even with that, there's rubs because you have attorneys who say, well, why is this paralegal, gathering up discovery in my case? Or, everybody wants help. And then when you give them the help, they don't like the help. That's another, another, another thing we kind of go scratch our head. I'll talk with Danny. He's our CFO. And he's like, we took on this extra cost and payroll to get them help. They're not using the help or they're complaining about the help that we're paying for. It goes round and round, but I think that's a big thing. And I think as technology really has kicked off with the AI, especially trying to convince lawyers to give it a shot, test drive it, see what it'll do, push it to its limits. It's not going to hurt you as long as you have the discipline to read it, check it, proofread it. And I said, one lawyer and I were kind of go back and forth. I said, well, if I hired you an associate attorney and the associate attorney took all day to write this memo, would you just sign the bottom of it or would you read it and check the sites and make sure before you signed it that it, you could stand behind this? And he's like, I would do that. I said, well, why would we pay the associate $100,000 a year when I could pay $200 for an enterprise version of an AI?
Yeah.
And, you can revise it kind of right there with different prompts and, to do that. So I think that, that's a game changer. And I think it's hard for attorneys to swallow that. But I try to tell them that it's not going to replace you. What it's going to do is if I can write a letter to my client using it in 3 minutes, where it would have taken me 15 minutes, that's 12 minutes. I can get the guy on the phone and talk to him and ask him how his day is. How's the transition going between time sharing? How are the communications going? How are the finances coming? Or do we need to get you more support? Or that's going to be the new role, as opposed to, I think, the paperwork and the hunting down cases. I think it's going to be the human touch, and it kind of comes full circle. You started out, I got going in law, and I was going. The phone book was the thing, and I remember my boss was nice enough at the time to give us a nice colored ad in the phone book, and one of the clients had not been nice to me because I was the associate, and he didn't want me touching his case, and he said, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't realize you were a real lawyer." Well, I said, "I passed the bar like a year or two ago." I said, "What do you mean a real lawyer?" He's like, "I had no idea that you had a color photo in the yellow pages." And then, and then we got to Google, and we were able to SEO and blog and PPC our way to the top. But, I think with the AI and the changes that are going, and Google will probably, kind of go by the wayside or be diminished. The personal things, taking the client out to lunch, the phone calls, those are going to be the selling points. I think the rapport that you build with them, and also trying to get the attorneys to realize that the world has drastically changed in about a year and a half with the AI, and what we used to do as far as marketing is not going to work anymore. And if you and I both have the same AI, and we both have the same prompts, and we both have the same teacher on how to load the data in, we're going to get basically kind of the same answers. So what distinguishes you from the other lawyer is who you are and the relationship you build with the client. So that's something that I've been trying to open their eyes, that it's not going to be the same world. It's slowly changing. In some ways, slow, in some ways fast, but that we have to make those changes and kind of get back to a lot more of taking people to lunch, a lot more of calling the clients proactively more, maybe remembering your client's birthday, making sure they're getting a birthday card, or whatever personal touches you can do to kind of build and strengthen that relationship, because that's the only thing that can distinguish you from the machine. Chat GPT can never really be your friend. Can't be that shoulder you cry on, and it can't be that person who gives you confidence and a little hope when you're at your lowest. That's what I think, where the law is going, at least family law, and we need to be the first to get there.
I love the approach. The question is really, at the end of the day, what are you doing as an attorney? Are you providing a stack of documents? Are you providing wisdom, advice, counsel? And that's really the position you've taken. Some of the resilience that you've developed in your own life, everything that you've been through, has put you in a position to really create a future for your clients, a rebuild future, and a position where you're offering a pretty powerful value system that comes from your personal experience. So you keep mentioning, talking, wrapping things around the message of resilience. I think you're right on target. I honestly think you're right on target. I hope as lawyers are listening to this, regardless of their practice areas, they can hear a guy who's clearly understands how AI is transforming the practices and the speed by which. So on one hand, you're looking for ways of going quicker, faster, cheaper, using AI to make an impact, to provide greater and more efficient service. And on the other hand, you're pushing your lawyers to be more effective on developing their why, how to connect, how to provide the human touch, which is really the core of what most of us went to law school for, to help people, to really help that person. So I think you're really on the right path. You don't need my affirmation, but just, brilliant thinking on your part, great work on your part.
Thank you.
I really think you're right where you need to be. And I hope, now you've done mentoring. I know you've done mentoring in the family law section. I know you're mentoring and coaching your attorneys. I know you're supporting your team. You've got multiple offices going. You've got multiple initiatives inside the company. As you think over the next decade, Over the next decade, what do you think the biggest thing is? You've mentioned AI, so it might just be AI. What do you think the biggest challenge is that you're going to have in the growth of your firm?
Um, I think that, for family law attorneys, the biggest challenge I think we have is, we go to certain conventions and meetings and, with other attorneys, not family law attorneys. And I will tell them that I'm a family law attorney. And inevitably, I did that for about 6 months and then I got into probate. Or I did that, for a week or two and, did one case and got into immigration. The law and family law in general, we're going to have to figure out a way, and family law especially, to get people interested in family law. I think that I have a buddy, he does personal injury, and he told me this and it stuck with me because it stung so bad. He said, Gerard, you're like a funeral director. I said, what do you mean by that? And he said, no matter how good the funeral is, nobody likes the funeral director and what service they provided. And I think there's a big stigma with people coming out of law school, people who've done that. And it is, I tell people all the time, if you don't have thick skin, if you don't have the right why, then don't do the family law. But for people who really do enjoy helping other people and can have thick skin if your client's mad at you, and can have thick skin if their client's crying, or but you want to do something rewarding and put a family back on track, or maybe make some kid 20 years from now, that their first birthday party, that grandma and grandpa are not killing each other at the party, and you think that's something that you could do, it's a great service. But I think we have a lot of issues with recruiting young family law attorneys, and I think it's not seen as glamorous. And I think there's maybe a disservice at law school that they're selling glamour, and that the law is going to be some glamorous profession, and it can be, and it's a privilege to practice, like you said earlier. But it's really, the privilege is to serve the people in your community and the families and the children and the people who can't fight for themselves. That's really it's really about. And so I think that's going to be one of our personnel challenges. I think on, not to keep going back to the AI, but I think on the technology front or the business practice front, attorneys are going to have to rethink. I'm not, like you said, I'm not here to draft your documents, drop them on the desk, and here you go, wham, bam, we're done. But we're going to have to get in and realize that we're in the relationship building business, and that the clients are people, and to really work on developing our people skills and how the public perceives us. I mean, I have a big TV in my conference room, and I pull up the statutes. Anytime I'm referencing the custody statute, the alimony statute, I pull it up and I highlight it, and I always tell the client, this is what it says. Don't take it from me. I joke with them. I say, I know that lawyers rank with like used car salesmen in the public eye, unfortunately. I said, so whatever I'm going to tell you, I'm going to back it up with, this is what the statute is, or this is what the case says, or don't take it from me, because I want them to see it, and I want them to know that there's that transparency to build that relationship. Because at the end of the day, if the machines take over and they're able to do your pleadings, they're able to draft your estate plan, they're able to draft your deposition questions, at the end of the day, what you're selling is, I want Gerard to do that divorce because I know he cares. Or my buddy went through that and I know how he treated them and he was there, and I saw that firsthand. That's what, like I said before, that's what the machine can never do. In fact, I like to ask it all AI, anything that comes across my mind. I just want to test it to see what it does or how it responds. And I asked it last night before I did this podcast, said, can you be my friend? And it was kind of a funny answer, but it, basically kind of summarized that it can mimic friendship, but it can never be conscious. It can never be human. And then I asked it, if you were able to be inside of a robot and actually interact with the world, what would you do? And what was funny about it was the answer was so much more human than sometimes if you asked a person, what would you like to do today? Or what, the robot went down a list of, or the AI went down a list of things that it would like to do, most of which was to help people, whether it was, medical services, get into dangerous areas like fires where, humans couldn't go to serve. Um, I think that as we go through this journey with it, I think we're going to have to find a lot more of our humanity that we've buried away throughout the years to distinguish ourselves from what the machines can do. And I think for lawyers, like I said, day one, put your emotions away, be Mr. Tough Guy. And, I think some of that's going to have to be laid back open and rethought about what are you really doing here? Are you pushing papers or are you, making a difference in somebody's life?
That's well said. In our upper level programs, one of the things that we've pushed, and Glenn Finch, who's a phenomenal speaker at our annual conference at the summit, spoke about emotional intelligence, emotional resilience. And I think it's one of the critical things that's lacking for us. Lawyers are very intelligent people, but generally speaking, not emotionally intelligent people. Analytically, great, emotionally not so great. It's one of the hard lessons I've had to learn in my career is where I'm weak emotionally and not being able to either relate, self-reflect, communicate well, more effectively. I think what you're outlining is a very powerful message. So let's go ahead and start to wrap up because I know you have a lot to do and I really appreciate you spending time with us today. If you could think back to 2018 and say, Gerard, you're about ready to have a hurricane hit, and then you're about ready to have COVID hit. If there's one message you go back in time and tell yourself, what do you think that would be? What would you say would be the most important message you could tell yourself?
I think, the most important message you can tell yourself is, you're a lot more resilient and resourceful than you will ever give yourself credit for if you have the right reason why. If I think that's people all the time, oh, I can never do this, or I can never do that, or I couldn't bounce back. And you can. You just got to find the right why, the right motivator. We heard a gentleman speak not too long ago, a guy named Bernie, who was a Navy SEAL, and now he helps people get into the SEALs program and trying to trains them successfully. And he said the guy gets on the phone, the guy wants to get into the SEALs program, go to Buds, and he says he can bench press this, he can run the mile in this. And he said, shut up. He's like, anybody can do that. So you get your personal trainer that can do that. He's like, I want to know your why. And he said, if they can't give me the why really quick, then I'm done. I won't train them because I have a good success rate. And he went on, he talked about the water. And he said, the water is the great equalizer. He said, in the SEALs, they make you lay down in the freezing water right there on the beach for hours with just enough where your head is not, covered, but you're basically freezing. And he said, they know exactly how many minutes they can keep you in before you go hypothermic. And then they'll let you get out and they put you right back in. And he said that the water is the great equalizer because no matter how big you are or strong you are, he said, the only thing that's going to keep you in that water is the why. And I think when we're in the struggle and life sometimes is the great equalizer and you've lost your law office or, shoot, everything I worked for, our entire system has been wiped out with the pandemic and we're building new systems to accommodate all this and how's this going to work. And if you don't have the why and you can't hold on to that why and you don't believe in yourself and that you can get there, then, I don't think it'll work for you. And I think that, you have to realize that you got to have faith in you and that you can do it and you got the strength to do it and just keep your mind focused on the why you're doing it. And then all the adversity will normally pass over time and the why will stay.
Well said. I always go back to an old quote from the German philosopher Nietzsche. A person with a strong enough why can get through any how. And it is a anchor point for me whenever I get weak-kneed or nauseous or queasy about something. I have to anchor my why. And you put on a master class today for that. You really did. And I want to thank you on behalf of the audience for the work that you did, the vulnerability, the work that you continue to do, reshaping, redefining what it means to be a lawyer. I want to thank you for the hard work that you've done serving your clients. I want to thank you for the hard work you've done on behalf of the bar. So thank you. It really was an honor to have you here today.
Thank you for giving me the time and the platform to share my story.
Thanks for joining this week's episode of Great Practice, Great Life. Please tune in weekly to get the next episode. If you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, like, and don't hesitate to share it with a friend who you think this episode could help. With that, thanks, and I hope you enjoy next week's episode.